Welcome to this special webinar with PPI and the 74. My name is Deanna Ross, and I will be moderating this discussion with our two fantastic experts on apprenticeship degrees today. I currently serve as the Director of Workforce Policy at the Progressive Policy Institute, or PPI. I run a project at PPI entitled New Skills for a New Economy, which focuses on how policymakers can provide a new economic offer to working Americans through alternative career pathways. At PPI, we believe that apprenticeship degrees can be a viable and inclusive path forward for Americans across occupations and industries. If you're unfamiliar with apprenticeship degrees, you're in the right place. We're going to go ahead and set the current landscape, but the concept behind them is to weave together a traditional classroom education and some hands-on experience. With that, we're going to learn more from our experts, Eric Dunker and Laura Hopkins, about what exactly apprenticeship degrees are and how they might be deployed to improve career education and workforce development in the United States. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our lovely panelists to introduce themselves. Eric, can you go ahead and start?
Sure. Thank you, Deanna. It's such a pleasure to be on. So yeah, my name's Eric Dunker. I lead our National Center for the Apprenticeship Degree, which is an initiative of Reach University. Reach University is the only 100% apprenticeship-based university in the country. They started doing teacher apprenticeship about 5 years ago in several states, have scaled to about 3,000 students. But then they created the National Center for the Apprenticeship Degree to help the rest of the ecosystem scale this model. So that means we work with state systems, other colleges and universities, and employer partners to scale these models in behavioral health, teaching, of course, allied health, and technology, to name a few. Prior to this role, I have about 18 years of experience in post-secondary education in a variety of roles. So I'm happy to get into the apprenticeship degree, why we're doing this, and all the other things in the future. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Laura, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Deanna. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Laura Hopkins, and I'm the executive director of an organization that's most commonly known as the Healthcare Training Fund. And we are one of the users, or are about to be one of the users of the apprenticeship degree, and super, super excited about it. So our organization, we are located in Washington State. And we work with all of the largest healthcare employers, specifically hospital systems in Washington State, and a lot of behavioral health organizations as well. And what we do is our organization is actually directly funded by those employers. And we then provide education benefits to the workers of those healthcare systems. So that's the funding from the employers helps us pay for those folks to get professional development, tuition assistance, all these different things. We help them succeed in their education plans. But we also do a lot where we get grant fund support in order to help people from the community get into the sector. And so we started an organization called the Healthcare Apprenticeship Consortium right before COVID. So it would have been 2018. We started that. And so we have apprenticeship programs in both physical healthcare and in behavioral health. So when I talk about healthcare from now on, I'm talking about both. They need to be integrated. And so we have been, I'll just say we have worked with community technical colleges and other public institutions for many years to offer apprenticeship pipelines. But there's always been some challenges. And so super excited when I encountered Reach, and we actually were able to mutually support each other, and that we are in the behavioral health sector and in the allied health sector and have relationships with all those employers, which Reach was looking to get into that field. And we were looking for a true apprenticeship degree and a partner that we could really co-create that with for the healthcare world. And so super excited about that. My background, also like Eric, although I have a really weird background, you'll see my airplane. I'm an airplane mechanic by trade, worked for many years in the aviation industry. but transitioned to education. And my last job before this was the vice president of instruction at a community college. So I have that background as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. For the audience, we'll kind of run through a number of questions, get the expertise of our panelists, and then we'll close out after that. So I'll go ahead and ask the first couple questions. So just broadly speaking, what do apprenticeship degrees mean to both of you, and how would you best describe apprenticeship degrees?
Sure. I guess I can take this first. So apprenticeship degrees to us mean it takes the best of both worlds of higher education and industry training, right? So we believe in the foundational theoretical knowledge that a higher education degree provides and that upward mobility. However, we live in an ever-changing world where many studies suggest up to 30 to 50% of the skills learned today could be outdated in 5 years. Education just can't keep up with the fast-changing skills economy that we're in. You know, who can is industry, who has to practice and adopt it on a dime every day, every week. And so, what our apprenticeship degree is it takes an incumbent worker, like an assistant, a teacher assistant, a nursing assistant, a help desk IT person, and it acknowledges that they need to work full time to make a living, but it also acknowledges that they have potential and they probably want to move into the next position, which sometimes requires a degree. So what an apprenticeship degree does is you co-construct with the employer and say, we're going to take the same outcomes of a cybersecurity analyst, of a teacher licensure that you learn in a classroom, but we're going to acknowledge that you're going to likely learn up to half of these skills on the job. And we're going to co-create a syllabi, or various syllabi that encompasses the best of workforce training and the best of theoretical training. And the faculty serve as sort of co-facilitators with industry. And that's a big construct change from higher ed. And then over the course of 4 years, this teacher assistant or nursing assistant will learn through on-the-job learning and through theoretical knowledge how to become a nurse or a cybersecurity analyst. So they're going to get their degree, they're going to move up into the next position. So what our mantra is, we help turn jobs into degrees, and we're going to help up to 50 million plus Americans who had some college, no degree, who were education first, didn't quite work for them. And you kind of take the best of the skills-based economy and higher ed theoretical knowledge, and you marry the two, and you create a new pathway to upward mobility. So that's what it means to us, and we're very bullish on this concept.
I'll add that from my perspective and how the apprenticeship degree, because we run a lot of apprenticeship programs. And so I think it comes down to what's unique about the apprenticeship degree versus what we already do today. Because today, I mean, speaking of bullish, I'm very bullish about recognizing people's work experience as being something that's valuable. And so we already in our world today have already partnered with community colleges in order to actually get all of the classes that apprentices take fully accredited through regular college systems. So they've been through the curriculum committees, they're fully accredited classes. And so at least today, when our students, our apprentices go through the program, they do end up getting college credit for their programs. Now, how's that different from the apprenticeship degree? That's the $1 million question. And why am I so excited? Because right now in the apprenticeship, in the current model, once folks, a few different things. Number one, once folks complete the apprenticeship, they still need to go on and take their courses, their general education courses. So they can't actually get just their full associate's degree through the apprenticeship. They actually complete the on-the-job training, they do their courses related to their coursework, and then they have to go on and do general education. So that's one distinction that we are partnering with Reach around. How do we actually embed the general education into an environment where adult learners learn better and that it's part of the apprenticeship? So for those of you who have an education background, anyone who studied the pedagogy, different theories of adult learning, you know that people learn best when they actually they think about theory, but then they go and practice it. and then they come back and they think about it again, and then they go back and practice it. And that's what the apprenticeship environment provides. Now you add a layer of that, and we say, hey, on top of that, let's take English. Let's just, if you have to do an English class, which most general education, you have to do that, and you need a research project. Well, instead of doing some random research project on Beowulf, why aren't we doing a research project on behavioral health research projects? And there are so many of them, and it's relevant to what they're doing every day in the workplace. It helps them thrive better in their work, but it also helps them be able to have relevant education. So that connection, the key piece, I think for some people from higher ed, they worry about apprenticeship because they say, well, what about the critical thinking skills and all these things that, come through liberal education? And I'm saying, I agree with you. They need to have that. But can we do it in a format that actually works for working adults even better? Like, you can learn critical thinking skills. You can learn all of those things within the context of your subject area. And then from there, once you've learned, you can then choose to go on and do other subjects if you want to do that. But it's demeaning to workers to say that they can't learn those things outside of, that they have to go and do some other kind of learning besides what they can learn through on the job training and the relevant subject areas to that. So, okay, sorry, that's one piece is around the general education. But the two other pieces that for me are super exciting around this is really recognizing the credit that people should get from a college perspective for the competencies that they learn on the job. So really, with apprenticeship, there's different ways of managing apprenticeship. But the best practice is that when folks are doing apprenticeship, the on-the-job training part is actually really strategic and directed. It's not a random, hey, you happen to come up to work and you're just like, stand around and watch, but rather you're actually tracking, hey, these are the competencies that they need to learn. How are we helping them learn this competency? So we work with our employers. We even have a tracking sheet for each of the apprenticeships. Like, here are the competencies. We work with the employer ahead of time to say, hey, how are you going to help them learn these? Let's talk about this. They think about it. They have a plan. And when the person is actually learning, they are working with their mentor. They learn that skill. And then it's the mentor signs off and says, yep, Tiana has learned that skill to this level. And we then get notified and we're tracking all that. Those are things that rightfully should have college credit attached to them because they are doing more learning than most people do in a classroom. And that, so with this apprenticeship degree, part of the model is that they actually are getting college credit for those things that they're learning on the job, whether it be concurrent learning or previous learning. Either way, as long as we can actually truly demonstrate that they have the skills, why would we not give them the credit for that?
And go
So,
ahead, sorry.
yeah.
Oh no, I was going to say
Sorry.
to go out to piggyback off of this. I'm sure many listeners are like, okay, this sounds great for the learner experience, but for an apprenticeship, this has to work for the employer. I think what
Yes.
Laura and I are describing is this is productive entry level employment that they're doing, and what is different is yes, there are intentional training and milestones within that job that one creates. So they're doing their theoretical training and they're on the job training. But don't mistake this for just somebody doing an idealistic paid work-based learning experience that doesn't work for the
Yeah.
industry. This is industry driven. This is mostly productive labor, but yes, an intentionality between higher ed and employer. I just wanted to name that because oftentimes people will say, well, how is it going to work for the employer lens? And the way it works is right now, employers, even in this economy, are struggling to fill entry level positions with motivated talent that want to move up, that want to stay there for a bit. This is a great way to attract motivated talent that just haven't had that pathway before. So they're going to do productive labor, but then they're going to be on a path to upward mobility with that employer. So it's a win-win-win for higher ed, win for the learner, but mostly it's a win for the employer.
That's right. That's right. Eric, you're absolutely right on that. I'm just going to finish out the other piece. So when I look at the apprenticeship degree and why it's exciting, the other piece, so you get credit for your on-the-job training. But bottom line, it comes down to this, like you can go through faster. You can get to the same level of knowledge and get acknowledged for what you know quicker. So to Eric's point, if you're an employer and you're trying to get folks like to have a level of competency, you need them to try to acquire that knowledge as quickly as possible. The apprenticeship degree does that for all the reasons that I mentioned. The third piece that I wanted to mention is the transfer with the apprenticeship degree, the transferability of that college credit directly into ongoing education. So the full pathway can be designed around apprenticeship from associate's degree to bachelor's degree to master's degree. And that's a game changer where they actually get credit and they don't have to. A lot of apprenticeship programs, you go through the apprenticeship and then it's like, oh, you want a bachelor's degree? You got to start over. Or maybe we'll give you 5 credits or something. So how do you actually, but with this degree, the concept is getting a higher quality education because of the adult learning theory, but you're doing it in a quicker fashion. And finally, with the least amount of expense possible so that no student loans for the student. So all those things, not even talking about what Eric was talking about around the employer side, which I could have a whole conversation around. Sorry. Okay.
No, that was great. Thank you guys. Yeah, I think, thank you, Eric, for kind of naming this big, industry, multiple industries-wide problem that we're seeing in workforce policy right now, which is that employers are still, complaining about the skills gap. There are these labor shortages, not enough people, qualified workers with the skills that they need to fill these roles. And at PPI, that's something we're kind of being very cognizant about and trying to find solutions to solve that issue. And I personally view apprenticeship degrees as being a great way to do that. But I think it would be good actually if we got a little bit more into the discussion of how you are incentivizing employers to participate in these apprenticeship degrees. I know, Laura, you touched on it a bit, but I think that's a really important part of this discussion because it will be difficult to kind of scale this model without getting that employer buy-in, right?
100%. And so what's why we're starting mostly in the care economy? Because in any rural or urban or suburban community, typically teaching and healthcare are the hallmarks, the backbone of that community. And in both of those industries, they are struggling with finding the right talent to fill critical roles and to retain that talent. And that's going to have a negative effect, right, on any community if you can't do that. A good example of this is between 2021 and 2023, the US spent, I think, $40 billion on traveling nurses, right? So these are individuals temporarily coming into a community, not staying there, leaving, when you have probably tons of entry-level talent that's right there in that community, that's from that community, that's likely to stay there, that if they had the right pathway, they could be the key answer, right? So it's part of it is how are we currently spending our money, right? Both on the public side and then on the private side, on the employer side. And how do we co-create an apprenticeship degree model that's going to be ROI positive for the employer? Part of the ways to incentivize them, though, is sometimes leveraging public policy, right? A good example of this is in the state of Michigan. They essentially declared the teacher shortage as a statewide emergency. So I think 2 years ago, they passed a $66 million legislative package specifically to go towards teacher apprenticeship. And so what that did was for the first like 3 or 4 years, right, pay for mentor stipends, pay for subsidy for tuition. So it incentivizes the higher ed, right? Helped pay for some wage subsidies if you're in a rural community, for instance, and at a certain threshold. And the idea is once people ingrain this model over 2, 3 years, it'll become self-sustaining. But there are times where philanthropy or a large employer or public policy can really help de-risk it for people. So that's another way we try to leverage employer buy-in. Because again, we're talking about nonprofit, educational districts. They don't have a ton of capital to invest in an apprenticeship program that's going to pay long-term yield. But another example of this is like I worked with a big company like Lockheed Martin when I was a VP at a community college in Colorado, where they can't outsource cybersecurity talent, right? Because of DoD stuff. And so they have to, and they quickly realized hiring four-year degree computer science individuals who are going to stay with a company is like finding a needle in a haystack. So about 3 or 4 years ago, they created this software development and cybersecurity sort of apprenticeship program, and then for community colleges. So they started leaning into entry-level talent at the community college. Then after that second year, as they're completing their cybersecurity pathway, then Lockheed would they'd interview, they would then let them into their program for 3 years, paid. They pay for their bachelor's degree completion, and they get them their clearance. And that's a new way, like a company like Lockheed Martin that had maybe some capital to invest in this is helping to solve their long-term talent needs. But I would argue in healthcare and teaching and the care economy, there should be a mix of public policy and likely private philanthropy with a little bit of an employer buy-in to help with that. So it kind of depends on the employer. But Laura's got a really good example of how she's working with employers through some public policy strategy in Washington.
Yeah. So it's interesting when this topic is a really fascinating topic. And I think when it comes to how do we solve the workforce system crisis and how do we fund it? I think fundamentally we need to shift how we think about this in a couple ways. So I'm going to first use our model as an example and then talk a little bit more about a few strategies. But um, we're unique in that we are what's called a training trust. And a lot of folks don't know what a training trust is. But if you, I'm going to reference it as the same as we are just like a retirement plan or a healthcare plan that you get from your employer. There are only three kinds of organizations that are regulated at a federal level under what's called ERISA law. And those are retirement plans, healthcare plans, and training trusts. And what they are is basically they are organizations where a third party, whether it be a retirement, healthcare, or training trust, is receiving money from an employer, typically, on behalf of their workers. But me, as the third party, I have to make sure that that money is going back to the workers on whose behalf it was given to us. We don't get, besides a small administrative fee, we are audited all the time to make sure this happens. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because those employers that we have are choosing to invest in our program. They are choosing to participate. In our case, we are in partner with the largest healthcare union in Washington State, SCIU 1199 Northwest. And so we're what's called a labor management partnership, where half of my board is labor and half of my board is management. And we sit right in between. And the area where they can agree on, which is workforce, is so when they agree on something, we come in and we do that work. So as a training trust, we receive money from the employers in order to do this very work. So we have our trust employers pay in for us to then build apprenticeship programs for their folks. Now, where this gets really tricky is that we can't fund for community workers because that money has to go back to those healthcare workers. It's only people who are already employed there that we can fund. And that money in general has to go for those specific individuals. So a couple of things. One, so about 8 years ago, our board said, "Hey, what you're all doing for our workers is great, but we need you to help us get people into the system." So we started having to go on a great big search to get public money, to get philanthropy money, whatever, to help people get in the door because we can't use these other funds. And so one of the things that we've been working on in Washington State is what we call a matching fund. We're really unusual in that most nonprofits have some other public funding or philanthropy funding, and they're desperate to get private funding. We're in the reversal where we have private funding and we're asking the public to match. Can you match the money that comes in so that we can use it for our community, get people in? When you talk about the European model, where they tax companies and whatever to run apprenticeship programs, we've created a mini version of that in our world where they're not taxed by the public, but there is this labor management partnership that's designed, employers pay in, and we want public funds to match that. Now, I think so. One of the things I would say to what Eric said, getting the public to help step in is really important. So we have money that we have received historically from Washington State to try to support some of this work. We hope to continue that. We also have been working with WIOA partners to try to get funding in through WIOA to support these folks coming in. So there's a whole strategy around funding for this, but I want to jump into what Eric said around the return on investment. So at the end of the day, when we're out, so we don't, by the way, our apprenticeship programs, we don't just offer them to our trust employers. We also offer them to any healthcare employer in Washington State. It's just that they have to pay to play if they're not part of our trust. If they're part of our trust, they've already been paying in, so we cover the cost. But if they're an outside entity, they have to pay to play. So what this means is we're out there every day talking to employers, healthcare employers, and saying, you should participate in our apprenticeship program. Of course, they're saying why. So we have to have this conversation. What is the return on investment? Why in the world would you do this? And it comes down to several things. At the end of the day, there's so much documentation. We have it. We've even had research done around our apprenticeship programs that show that within 2 years, the difference between someone coming in through a community college versus someone coming in through apprenticeship, there's over a 50% return on investment beyond what they would get from a traditional person. And that data ties back to the fact that you don't have to hire as many recruiters, that you don't have to, there's not as much churn. So there's longevity attached with people who come in through apprenticeship. Like there's all these statistics, there's actual data that shows there's a return on investment. Now, the other part of this that's true is that it takes energy to start an apprenticeship program. So when you are a healthcare employer, let me just talk about behavioral health employers, man. They are the saints of the world. They are operating, I say they operate in the orange because they're not quite in the red. Somehow they're alive, but they're certainly not in the black. So they operate in the orange. So asking them above and beyond what they're already doing to now somehow have some staff time to actually figure out how to implement this, who's tracking the on-the-job training, who's doing blah, 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 right? There are resources involved. So we actually, some of that state money and philanthropy money have gone after specifically for the behavioral health sector specifically. I would argue this differs when you're talking about physical health and you have private employers who they would say they don't make money, but they make way more money than the behavioral health employers. And there's another scale, which is physical health folks who are public, right? Our University of Washington Medical Center, they also are barely operating. So there's like these different scales. But when you're talking about organizations like behavioral health, I argue that we have to get them started. We need money. So we actually provide employer incentives to those behavioral health employers through public and private philanthropy in order to help them be able to overcome that initial cost. Once they're up and running, in all of our medical assistant program, they do that for a few years. They see the return on investment. They're good to go. They can run. They don't need that support anymore. Now with behavioral health, they still need the support. Like we haven't been able to let them off yet because they don't have the resources to cover. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. Okay, there's a lot more I could say, but I know I'm talking too much. Sorry.
Well, actually, Deanna, I'm gonna like ask a question you're probably gonna ask right now. And the other issue, so you just asked what's in it for the employer. We also have to know like what's in it for higher ed, right? And so the $1 million question is why would higher ed, who has the traditional programs set up in sort of this traditional structure, why would they want to disrupt themselves? And I think the answer from my perspective is since 2011, 2012, largely higher ed enrollment has been flat or declining. And it's in the last 30 years, on average, teacher education programs are declined about 40%. And yet the talent need is 2x that, right? And nursing programs, right? They have a limited capacity because it's very expensive to scale a traditional nursing program. Did you know that over 100,000 qualified US applicants are denied entry into nursing programs every year due to lack of capacity? So you have this collision of issues of how can higher ed be more responsive to the economy and labor market, but also how does higher ed increase their enrollment, right, with quality. And the apprenticeship degree is a good way to do this. And what we try to train traditionally based universities that are not like a Reach who's designed to be apprenticeship based is create a parallel pathway. So take your teacher education program, take your nursing program. That's great. Like we're not trying to change your traditional structure, but what we can do is create a parallel model that's an apprenticeship degree model where up to 50% of the learning takes place on the job. You have more of a practitioner level faculty leading the program, still under the same accreditation. These are more like syllabi level changes, right? And what higher ed's going to get out of this is learners they would not have otherwise enrolled, because again, these are working learners first. They cannot and will not be a full-time working learner, worker, and a full-time learner when the two paths are disconnected. But when you actually connect the two paths, where your full-time job feels like part of that degree is just part of your full-time job, it changes the paradigm. And so the higher ed clients and partners we're working with right now are absolutely seeing a net increase in enrollment, again, for participants they may not have otherwise had. Their industry partners are then getting access to local talent they may not have otherwise had. So it's that win-win-win value proposition that has to be in it for the employer, which we kind of talked about. But that higher ed component is so critical. You're seeing more states now go to more performance-based funding. You're seeing more policymakers and industry practitioners ask what kind of work-based learning experiences do students have? Due to the excellent research by Strata Education, we know less than 30%, I believe, of all higher ed students get any work-based learning before they graduate, although more than 50% desire it. And so that is the key element is how do you integrate work-based learning like an apprenticeship degree, but make it make sense for your business model from a higher ed standpoint and the employer standpoint. This is why this can be incredibly challenging on the surface to implement, but that's the whole reason organizations like mine are around, the National Center for the Apprenticeship Degree, because we help kind of get this process started for an ecosystem that really wants to ingrain this. Thank you. Sorry, I just asked your own question, but back to you, moderator.
No, no, that's great. Um, what I really love about this discussion is that, everything sort of just builds off of all of the different components, and you're both so knowledgeable that it's making my job so easy. Um, thank you both. I want to talk a little bit about what some of the current challenges are in trying to scale apprenticeship degrees in the United States. I know we see probably similar barriers to entry with, right, just, regular traditional apprenticeship programs. But let's talk a little bit about the challenges and how you might recommend we solve some of those challenges.
I'm going to just jump in here. I think, one of the challenges we have is around funding. So, as we've already started talking about, and I really, really want policymakers and legislative folks to start thinking differently about education. Really thinking about it connected to work is such an important thing. And so, from my perspective, one of the big things that would help is that in addition to having funding the traditional way that it goes to colleges, that there should also be funding that's directed to apprenticeship sponsors. And then the apprenticeship sponsor can choose which education entity that they want to work with. Now, I don't know, in some states this might be easier than in other states, but in our state, it can be a challenge. And I don't want to, like, I love our community colleges. I've come out of them, so I'm not trying to badmouth the community colleges, but they have they're coming from a different perspective with different goals. It's just different. And so when we try to partner with them on apprenticeship degrees, often it feels like we're trying to put a round peg into a square hole, and it does not fit. And they're trying to meet their ends and saying, hey, it needs to look like this, it needs to be in this, it has to fit into this box. And we're like, why does it have to fit into that box? If the money came for these students directly to us, and then we were reaching out to colleges to say, hey, we have those resources, we want to do this with you, who wants to come help us figure out how to make a round hole rather than a square box? And then then we would have folks saying, hey, I want to do that. I want to come, let's do that. And we partner together and we make it happen. And we then also have the ability to partner with organizations that are willing to give credit for prior learning, credit for concurrent learning, doing, embedding the general education, doing and thinking in that way. And so really reversing, honestly, it reverses sort of this power dynamic that exists. I hate to say it, but there is a power dynamic in the higher education world, where they're very much tied to, this is how it has to be, and we're in charge and we get to decide. And so for us on the outside, trying to say, I know it's always been that way, and then there's value to that, but there's also value to this. And to add to what Eric said, I want to really re-emphasize that point. We are not stealing their students, because these are entirely different students that otherwise would not be showing up to higher ed. I can tell, we have so many videos of the stories of our graduates who talk about how they never in a million years thought or even envisioned being able to get a degree. And now they did. And they could envision themselves doing it, and they actually succeeded. And watching, I mean, it's powerful. And these are people, and they still will say, never would have gone to a traditional college ever. So like that piece, and being able to access people who have other barriers. Care if you have a learning disability. I don't care if you're somebody who has extra family responsibilities for all the different reasons. I don't care if if you're somebody who has lived a criminal background, or there's so many different reasons why it's hard for people to go to a traditional college within their box. And we're trying to access those people who they have to work, that it's not an option for them. And so how do we help them not only be able to succeed, but to do it in a reasonable amount of time with little cost, and be able to move it forward. And oh my goodness, the partnership between the employer and them, the relationship that gets built. I mean, there's nothing else like it. And from the employer's perspective, they get these loyal workers who are really committed to the organization, who are fully engaged. When someone comes out of the college, if they haven't been through apprenticeship, they have to retrain them. They have to start. These are our policies, procedures. They have to do that anyway. If they do it through apprenticeship, when they're not only are they doing that, but those are productive workers. We are able to demonstrate that within 3 months, they're 60% productive on the job workers within 3 months. And then they spend the remaining time of their apprenticeship getting that last 40% down, which are the higher level skills. Well, they're producing for these folks, for the employer. So the employer, it's like, to Eric's point about the value to the employer, it's phenomenal. It's just getting them over how do we get it started? How do we move that forward? And once the employer does it and they see it, they're like, oh, now I get it. Okay, I'm in. All of our behavioral health employers, except for one, and we have a lot, 50 some behavioral health employers, every single one has come back to do more. That is the test case where it works.
Yeah, and I would say, Deanna, thank you, Laura. Spot on. Deanna, to your question about what are some challenges, there's two things I want to discuss. One is the enabling conditions that really mostly needs to come from the states, because licensing boards are typically state run, right? There's a coordinating board. Good example of this is like in nursing, right? Can you pay for clinicals? Can you not? Can you do an apprenticeship? What is that state nursing board? What's the makeup of them, and what's their appetite? Knowing that the nursing shortage is a crisis in basically every state, let me shine an example on a state that's starting to figure this out. So the state of Alabama, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, created sort of a nursing apprenticeship initiative through the State Board of Nursing, through the governor, and through 17 different community colleges and I think some universities. And now, 2 years later, they have now infused 600 net new nurses into their workforce through apprenticeship. And they've actually created a nurse apprenticeship permit to more signify what a nurse apprentice can and cannot do. So it reduces liability on that RN. And they're the only state that I know of that's actually done this permit, and that's had that kind of explicit rules. A lot of other states and a lot of proof points out there are kind of working beneath and around systems right now, so you're not seeing a ton of scale. But you're starting to see more proof points in nursing. But I would say naming the enabling conditions that need to be true for this to happen with quality, again, it's always comes down to quality, but also, again, it's filling your state's workforce need. And right now, most states are dramatically struggling with the nursing shortage. If we don't do anything different in the next 5 years, some estimates suggest we could be 1 million nurses short for our aging, our aging population, right? It's going to be a problem. Nursing apprenticeship is a solution to the limited capacity of traditional programs, but you have to name it typically at a state or licensing level. So that's a good example for nursing apprenticeship. So enabling conditions. But another challenge is also, I think, the practice for credit for on-the-job learning. Higher ed typically doesn't have a good formula for that. There's credit for prior learning, like Deanna, if you came in into an accounting program and you worked as an accountant for 15 years as a technician, we can give you some assessments about what you're coming in with and then kind of give you some block credit. But Deanna, if you are coming in with just a year of experience, but you're actually working as a current accounting technician in partnership with the university and an employer, so we kind of know what the experiences that you're getting as you go. How are we assessing the learning as you go, right? That's away from the controlled environment of a classroom. There are lots of tools out there that can help you with this now, but that is a deep area that NCAD helps support other colleges and employers with is that how do you assess on-the-job learning and how do you make sure accreditors are cool with it, right? Both regional, third-party accreditors, licensing boards. So I would say the credit for on-the-job learning is a challenge. And the other challenges, like Laura has named, is public funding. Now, again, what we're not asking for is net new public funding. What we are asking for is how are we spending the money that we currently have in the workforce or in education? Two good examples. One, most state institutions are funded by block grants based on butts and seat 3 weeks into the term. It's not based on outcomes. It's not based on performance. And and we should incentivize this behavior of an apprenticeship degree, knowing that you're going to increase retention, you're going to better serve underrepresented students or learners to say, okay, if we set aside a certain amount of grants through this block funding and you apply for this, if you're doing an apprenticeship degree, maybe that'll help fund some of these initiatives better and help incentivize these initiatives to work. And the other area is WIOA dollars. We have billions of dollars in our current workforce system, many of which is spent on training that is hard to assess whether it's quality or not, has outcomes that we're not so sure about. Here's what's happened in a few states. In Tennessee, right now, local workforce boards typically have unlimited discretionary about how they spend these dollars. But the state of Tennessee kind of named the teacher shortage as a crisis. And what they did was they declared you must spend 10% of all state WIOA dollars on teacher apprenticeship. So that's helped infuse more public funding to support teacher apprenticeships. Whereas a local workforce board who's been giving to the trades for years, which is fine, we want that to happen. But if there's new apprenticeships coming on board, we want to make sure there's an equitably distributed pot of money. And sometimes naming what your labor market priorities are as a state and then actually putting some teeth to it through how they're spending some of these pass-through dollars is a policy consideration. I think that's worth discussing. And so there's pockets of states that are starting to do this. So those are just some examples of challenges, all that can be overcome. But if we want to see scale, we can't just be one off. You have to be like Alabama or be like Michigan that passed a large bill to just infuse scale right away. And then ideally, the system will prove if it works or not. Typically, it will. And then you understand how to reappropriate public policy funding incentives to make this happen even more.
I want to add one more thing, just given, so exactly, ditto to everything Eric just said. But I want to add one more thing, which is from my perspective, given my role, I would say that it's really interesting. My being in this labor management partnership, it's one of the hardest things to do. It's also one of the best things to do, because even though labor and management oftentimes might disagree with each other, and but I'm telling you what, when they decide they're on the same page about something, they can move mountains like that. So I would just encourage folks to think about not just employers, but to actually think about industry, the workers and the employers, which typically, not all of them are represented by a union, and that's fine too. But where there are union representation, to actually really lean into that in a partnership way. Because when they decide together and the employer's trying to do something and labor's on board, that's been so significant for us in Washington State, where we had that labor management coming together and both saying, "Hey, we want these apprenticeships," and then boom, like they were able to build them out, and being able to build them in really successful ways. That there are things that on the employer side they didn't think about. Oh, from an employee, oh, I should think about these things, and vice versa. So when they came together and we actually designed together the programs, it was really powerful, and they were all bought in. And so then it was like, and even at the state level, then it's like everyone was on board to move it forward. So it really helps to have that partnership as a key piece.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I would just ask if either of you have any final thoughts, any kind of concluding thoughts, to go ahead and share them now.
um I would just say, I think, I don't know who all is watching this, but you who are watching this, um, we need to take action on this. Like this is a game changer. It's revolutionizing education. It's revolutionizing workplace experience. It is really, we need this moment in time to take advantage of this to really flip things. And so, and we have, it's great. We have NCAD, we have organizations like us that are already out there and doing this work. So there's models that we can take and run with. It's not like starting from scratch. And so I just really want to say, to everybody to please, please, please dig in. Don't just listen to this and like, oh yeah, okay, that was kind of cool, I'm going to move on. But actually, let's figure out how to come up with a plan, because it's doable. And in this very um, unusual moment in our American history, there's also opportunity to like, as things are being kind of questioned, like, is there a way to take advantage of this moment to really drive to the things that will ultimately be positive, even in the midst of some of the, might I say, chaos that's happening. So I would just highly encourage, taking advantage of this moment, and let's move this forward. And I'm happy to be a part of the thinking around this and to answer questions and to try to support in whatever way I can.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, no, it's a good question, Deanna. And I would say, look at your state labor market projections, right? Typically in the healthcare space, the teaching space, the technology space, the behavioral health space, you're going to look at some severe shortages with the demand in services, right? And so if we don't do anything, how are we going to solve this problem? And I think one of the key ways to solve this problem is, again, looking through the apprenticeship degree and say, are we going to be able to serve students we wouldn't have otherwise been able to serve, and get them into these pathways, productive employment and higher ed? I want to make it very clear. Sometimes when people look at these labor market shortages, there's a knee-jerk reaction and say, we're just going to go 100% skills-based hiring. That sounds good on the surface. However, for upward mobility, majority of positions still require a degree, right? If you actually look at in technology right now, and this is based on Indeed.com, if you actually look at all the technology positions that are posted, 71% still require a degree. So you can be skills based and degree based as well. So what we reject is completely going around higher education to create your talent. That may work in some industries, but if you want upward mobility for students or for learners to get mid-level and upper level, that degree is still valuable. But there's a way to re-engineer how they're getting to that degree early on. So it is skills based, but they're still getting that degree. So well, I just want to name that, because sometimes, again, oh, was this going to go skills-based hiring, forget about degrees? That is not how our economy has worked, and likely still will not work, in order for mid-level and upper-level positions. And so we still believe the degree is valuable, but there are better and more inclusive ways to get there.
Well, thank you both. I think even as someone who's familiar with apprenticeship degrees, I learned more from you both today, and I think this is a very important conversation to be having. Um, In fact, PPI is going to be releasing a report on kind of the current landscape of apprenticeship degrees in the next couple of weeks. So I'd encourage everyone to kind of be on the lookout for that if you're looking to learn more. And yeah, I think that kind of concludes our conversation. But another big thank you to Eric and Laura for joining us today. And I hope everyone can kind of take something away and you've been given actionables, right? So I'd love to see folks sort of engaging and you know, reach out to me, reach out to Eric, reach out to Laura, and let's keep the momentum going.
Yeah, well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
having us,
Deanna.
Deanna.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys.